Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, it's the Security Weekly News, episode 314. I'm Doug White. It is the week of 30 July 2023. We got Throbbing Gristle, China, Dragos, Ransomware, Tomcat, Ivanti, Radio, My Mother the Car, Jason Wood, and more on this episode of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Why does multi-factor authentication have to be a pain for users? It doesn't. Beyond Identity is the most secure MFA on the market and the easiest to use. They ensure that every authentication is multi-factor by default, with phishing-resistant factors that secure access from the start. Beyond Identity safeguards organizations from breaches, data loss, and fraud by eliminating weak phishable authentication factors like OTP and SMS push codes. Go to securityweekly.com/beyondidentity to get a free demo. That's securityweekly.com/beyondidentity to get a free demo today. Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Yeah, all right, welcome to Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White. So there's a big story over the weekend. It was so big, actually, that even one of my old professors sent it to me and said, "Have you seen this?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, thanks, Phil, but I have." But the Biden administration in the United States, this is the president of the United States, believes, wait for it, and take note that I said this in 2007, a quote, ticking time bomb which could disrupt the military may have been implanted in the U.S. power and communications networks. Who did this? Blofeld? Schmersh? Nope. Wait. China. I mean, you know, that hostile foreign power that we've been enemies with since, like, I don't know, forever, that plays long games and manufactured every single chip and motherboard and firmware that we had forever and ever and ever, and basically every product, that actually physical thing in the United States that was manufactured in China, that hostile foreign power. Yeah, well, there's a story broke in the New York Times that basically said that the United States, is hunting for malware, which may be hidden in infrastructure. So this all started back in May when Microsoft said they found some odd code in telco systems in Guam on a U.S. airbase, and then they started finding it elsewhere in the United States. So far, the U.S. government has not disclosed how they reached this conclusion with Microsoft that China's behind it, and they haven't really disclosed exactly what it might be. But the theory is that this code could be used to distract the United States in the event that Beijing moves to invade Taiwan. I mean, we won't even get into the whole, Euro-Asian political sphere thing that's going on with Taiwan and Chiang Kai-shek and Sun Yat-sen and all that stuff, which I could be happy to talk to you about. But anyway, in my speech all those years ago, that was the scenario I used. So my comment was that what if deeply hidden firmware components could be activated in some remote manner to create mass chaos, like, say, all the stoplights in the United States turn green at the same time? And at the same moment, China launches an invasion, and all those radar sets that are sitting in Taipei or on ships out there, suddenly shut down, or the F-16. And I don't like doomsday scenarios because they're not usually realistic. But, what if all the F-16 suddenly couldn't, activate their engines or what have you? And I know there's all kinds of hardening and stuff because it was just an example. It wasn't supposed to be like, realistic. But it's sci-fi stuff, right? And I wasn't truly serious about it. I was just trying to explain, and what I'd been asked to do was explain a cyber war scenario to a bunch of military people who were not really up on that stuff at the time. but it looks like I was a lot closer than I thought. I mean, it's actually pretty scary that maybe a hostile foreign power who manufactured chips and motherboards and firmware and almost every little component of every little thing, from your thermostat to the water valve supply to the tank to everything else in the U.S., was manufactured in China over the last 50 years, which is pretty scary thing. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Well, at the same time, the Pentagon in the United States is investigating a critical compromise of communications across 17 U.S. Air Force facilities and other major commands. This came as a result of a tip from a base contractor that a 48-year-old engineer at Arnold Air Force Base in Tennessee was taking home government radio tech in a Forbes report. So, I'm like, we keep seeing these compromises, and I'm like, do you guys not have any security at all? But apparently the engineer was taking home stuff and had managed to amass about $90,000 of equipment and had unauthorized admin access to radio communications tech that was being used by the Air Education and Training Command, which is one of the 9 major commands of the U.S. Air Force, and that affected 17 Defense Department installations. Wow. So apparently, when they went with a search warrant, they found an open computer screen that showed the engineer was running a Motorola radio programming tool, and that the software contained in that system was the entire Arnold Air Force Base comm system. The engineer also had USB keys, which contained admin passwords and system keys for the entire radio network. The person also had local law enforcement radio programming files and other equipment, which indicated that they were government property. Like they were, the stuff, if you've ever worked for the government, the pencils you get say property of U.S. government, and you're taking this home as a federal crime. I still have some of those at my house, I think. Statute of limitations, guys. I know it doesn't apply, but anyway, this person had already been reported twice as an insider threat. Now, I got reported as an insider threat once when I worked for the government because I made a joke and I said we should sell that to the Russians and balance the budget. And, my secretary immediately picked up the phone and was like, I have to report this. And, and here comes the Secret Service going, are you an insider threat? But this person had been reported twice already. They had also been reported for unauthorized possession of Air Force equipment already, but nobody done anything. So they went on to say that the contractor may also have had access to FBI communications and the Tennessee State Agency communications. So this is, a freaker. And so the name of the person has not yet been disclosed, but the contractor, apparently somebody was able to contact this person, claims they were carrying out tests of base security, that they had subsequently improved the protection of radio communications on the site and so forth, but is being charged under the Espionage Act. Now, this, of course, sounds like one of those people that we've often had, that a lot of us know and that have been around for a long time, the Alt 2600 types, radio freakers and all these kind of people, and in the old days, this was certainly something people did, that, they attacked, banks and reported what they did and so forth. So it's not clear yet exactly how problematic this is and whether or not this person was just maybe a little bit misguided and they're, I'm going to prove that this is really insecure kind of person, or was this another person like that Teixeira guy who basically is trying to impress other people? It's not clear. They haven't released all that. So we'll keep an eye on that one too. According to this report, the number of ransomware attacks targeting industrial organizations and infrastructure has doubled since the second quarter of 2022, according to the report from Dragos. The report said that they had documented 253 ransomware incidents in the second quarter of 2023, which was an 18% increase from just the first quarter of 2023. Ransomware incidents in this sector have been steadily rising by double digits, according to the report. The report said this is due to more companies refusing to pay in other sectors, and revenue in the ransomware sector had plunged in 2022. Dragos said that the third quarter of 2023 will witness increased impacts of ransomware attacks against industrial organizations due to political tensions between NATO and Russia, which will drive more Russian ransomware groups to target and disrupt NATO countries. And part of that, of course, being that when you have conflicts with other countries, they tend to say, hey, it's open season on them and nobody's going to be prosecuted. And Russia has certainly done that in the past and, with the Ukrainian conflict and all that. But they also said that as more victims continue to refuse to pay up, attackers are going to keep shifting their focus to other industries in order to sustain their revenues. The report says the most active group currently is Lockbit, followed by Alpha V and Black Basta. And the manufacturing sector continues to be the most heavily targeted, followed by the industrial control systems market, transportation, and the oil and gas industry. So if you're working in any of these, beware, but be advised that, and then you may want to check this report out. It's pretty comprehensive. Speaking of ransomware, according to this story, there is no evidence that victims who hold cyber insurance policies are more likely to pay a ransom than companies without insurance. The study came out of Royal United Services Institute in the United Kingdom, and they're attempting to debunk the idea. And then this has been around for a while, so there was a sort of conspiracy-esque kind of thing that buying cyber insurance made you more vulnerable to ransomware because then the ransomware people knew they should target you because you had insurance, and that the insurance, it's kind of one of those circular things. And it kind of makes vague sense, like a lot of good conspiracies. But the idea was that cyber insurance is driving up ransomware, since cyber insurance covers the payment. So, it's just, okay, fine, we get hit, we pay, it's no big deal. And that the ransomware people perceive that. They did say that cyber policies, which were exfiltrated during ransomware attacks, did allow the attackers to ask for more in ransom, since they knew the company had insurance, and they kind of probably got the policy, which then told how much they could expect to be paid. But they could not show in this study that there was any indication that attackers were specifically targeting insured companies. The response to this from GroupSense was that the prevalence of cyber insurance has helped with the prevention measures in the industry, since insurers require more stringent controls and the validation of those controls. And I will certainly attest to that. But I guess my comment to you on all this is you probably should review your cyber policies, make sure they're protected, and maybe don't put them on, outward-facing systems or something, and read them very carefully so you know what the limitations of your policies are. I don't think having insurance results in more targeting of you, but some of the policies I've seen were not exactly in line with what the person who bought them thought they were. I mean, I did one of those, and the person was like, "What do you think about this? And will this be sufficient?" So be prepared. It might be a good time to review. I mean, we saw the story about the ransomware increasing. We're seeing stories about, cyber insurance. And if you have cyber insurance or you're considering cyber insurance, you may want to think that through pretty carefully and make sure you read those policies, because you know how marketing is. This policy will save your life, but it may actually not. So be prepared. Well, if you're using Apache Tomcat, there is evidence that it is being used to spread Mirai botnet malware, among other things. I mean, it's Tomcat. Come on. Tomcat's an open source Java app server, which has been around for ages, and it's heavily used on a lot of web servers. And it's often run as a backend for Apache, so it's a processing tool for the backend of Apache. According to the article, it is being used by about half of the Java teams that they interviewed for the article. They didn't say exactly how many that constituted or what percentage of the overall market that was. But Nautilus deployed a Tomcat server honeypot, and they had attracted 803 attacks over the last 2 years, which were specifically aimed at infecting the servers with Mirai botnet payloads. And then, of course, those Mirai botnets are used for distributed denial of service and crypto mining stuff. The attack that was being used in this case is an exploit of weak user and password credentials in the config files of Tomcat. And if you've ever set up Tomcat, and I have, you know that it's really old-fashioned, and it's got a lot of these old text-based conf files, and a lot of them require, embedded passwords. I mean, there's ways around all that, but a lot of people don't do that. They just install Tomcat, get their web server up and running, and they don't worry about it very much. And boy, is that thing scary. But once these people are able to get into this, they can drop a web shell, which will allow remote code execution. The report said 12 distinct different shells were observed being used in the attack, but the most common one was dropping a shell script called new-w. It's like new W, like NEWW. But there's a file called tomcat_users.xml, which we all know if you've ever worked with Tomcat. And basically, that file specifies which authorized users on the system can access Tomcat. And a lot of people used to just put that file in there, and they would put some generic user in it, and they would hard code a password right there. Now, you don't have to do that anymore, and it typically isn't, but it still references the user, and they get their password off the system. But a lot of times those were shared passwords, they were weak passwords, and so forth. And, of course, then the attackers can brute force it and guess the password. A lot of these were set up a long time ago, and people didn't necessarily secure them or even attempt to secure them at all. And let me tell you, so a lot of these sites may be around, so I would really suggest maybe looking at your environment and making sure they're not a bunch of old Tomcat servers or new Tomcat servers you just put up sitting around somewhere that have never been secure or they've been forgotten. And I know you know every single thing in your network, and and there's no way some guy in marketing would ever set up a server using a how-to guide back in 2010 and leave it running with a fantasy baseball league on it right in the middle of your network. No way that ever happened. No chance. So check it out. Well, Ivanti, who was reported on last week for a 0-day, patched a second 0-day this week. They just patched this other one in their Endpoint Manager mobile software called EMMM. Well, guess what? They patched another one yesterday. So the new one is only a 7.2 in severity, but it is a path traversal vulnerability, which can allow the attacker to write arbitrary files on the appliance. So combine that with the other one, and big things happen. The new vulnerability impacts all versions of Endpoint Manager Mobile. So if you're using Endpoint Manager Mobile or even old Mobile Iron, which was what that product used to be called, I would say you definitely need to be patching that right now. Ivanti said it was critical that users take immediate action to remediate, and they have released patches. When used in conjunction with that other flaw, they can bypass administrator authentication and all the ACLs that you might have on the system. And that, of course, would be bad. Ivanti said that Mnemonic was the company that helped identify this new vulnerability. And Mnemonic said they had observed the vulnerability being exploited with the more critical vulnerability being used to write Java server pages and java.class files to disk. CISA urged security teams to patch the vulnerabilities and said that both of the Ivanti vulnerabilities are being actively exploited. So if you're using these products, patch now. My car is connected. I had to take it to shop after some guy backed into it at a restaurant, and it's been sitting there for like weeks, but it contacts me pretty regularly to let me know what's going on, so when and if they actually do anything. Well, the California Privacy Protection Agency, which is a new thing that was put into place in California, in its first ever case, announced on yesterday, that they're going to probe the data practices of these newer cars that are connected like this. I mean, my car pretty much tracks everything that's going on. If you open the door, if you open the rear hatch, if anything you do to the car, I can see it, and it gives me an alert. I mean, it's probably reporting back to some evil bunker somewhere. I don't know, but I mean, it's telling, Volvo that I drove to the Indian place for takeaway Sunday night, or I parked illegally on a street in Boston last night, even though I should have known better, but the meter maid didn't get me. But don't get me started on the speed limit on I-95. But I mean, there are many conveniences within this issue, and this is the same privacy issue we always talk about. I mean, the car knows where it is. It knows what it's running. It knows how hot it is inside. It's reporting all this information somewhere because it's then reporting it to me. I can remotely start it. I can remotely turn it off. I can make the lights flash. I can do all kinds of tricks with my phone. I mean, it is covered in cameras, so I presume all those can be tapped as well, even though I can't see them for some stupid reason. But I always have mixed emotion about the whole privacy thing. And I know some of you feel very strongly about it in both directions. I mean, I don't really do anything interesting. I mean, I don't really care, but I do see how this stuff gets used for oppression, and when people start tracking people and so forth, and they start putting people up against the wall because they said they liked the Barbie movie or whatever, or you wore a Mets cap to a Phillies game or any of that kind of stuff. But I presume that, they will find what they always find in this study, that the companies are misusing, mishandling, and manipulating the data for profit. But I'm a cynic, and the U.S. desperately needs some kind of privacy legislation like Europe has, because this stuff is a lot more serious there, but we don't have it. So okay. Well, he holds the record for the longest beard of bees, and it's very difficult, to have the longest beard of bees. But he also holds another amazing record, the longest beard of octopi. It's almost impossible to keep all those slimy tentacle creatures attached to your face to get the longest beard of octopi. So please welcome Jason Wood.
Hey, Doug.
Hi.
Good to be with you. Glad that I got rid of my beard of octopi before the call.
Back in the tank.
So yeah. So to pick up on the privacy comments that Doug just had, we're going to kind of continue on with that now, but more from a government standpoint. In this case, this is kind of like more the war on search warrants. continuing to go on on the national stage. There are actually 2 articles published yesterday that talked about various aspects about the collection of information about American citizens, which there's supposed to be restrictions on, what intelligence organizations are able to collect about U.S. citizens and whatnot. Anybody who's not a U.S. citizen is basically fair game. But the first one was the reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act by the U.S. Congress. And the second was about an amendment to the current National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, because that's just way too long to say. I'm actually not going to talk about the Section 702 renewal, but I did want to take a look at the article that was published by Ars Technica about the NDAA amendment that has been proposed by some members of the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, for those not familiar with the NDAA, this is an annual tradition / circus / bill that occurs every year, apparently since like 1961 or something like that, in the U.S. about where Congress tells the U.S. military how they're supposed to spend their budget. And you'll also see it make the news because it becomes the target of amendments by legislators to make some kind of political point or do a little bit of grandstanding, get some news, stuff like that. And you'll see all kinds of shenanigans there. And this year, though, it seems like we've skipped the congressional drama a little bit and actually gone for an amendment that is kind of important around, at least it is to me, around some of the privacy or the surveillance of U.S. citizens. The amendment was proposed and added on by Representatives Sarah Jacobs and Warren Davidson. That would basically prohibit U.S. military agencies from buying data that would normally require a warrant for them to access in some way, or a subpoena, or some other kind of court order. And this would cover all military intelligence organizations, including the National Security Agency, or the NSA. Now, interesting to me, Representative Jacobs and Davidson are from opposing parties, and apparently they get along a little bit and are able to propose legislation together. And I've heard rumors that this happens from time to time, but for some reason it always shocks me a little bit when I see it, even when it's over mundane things like everybody, proposing an announcement or something like that. That every day of the week ends in the letter Y. In English, at least. Snarky comments aside, the Senate is now negotiating their version of the NDAA, and amusingly enough, last week the House Judiciary Committee unanimously voted to advance a bill known as the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act, which I think is kind of hilarious the way they put that, but. This bill also has similar restrictions against buying data about Americans, only it applies to all government sectors instead of just the military. That actually came from a bill last year by Senators Wyden and Rand Paul, about, 2021 was when that was introduced. And it never made it out of committee, so now it looks like Senator Wyden has confirmed that this bill is going to be reintroduced there. Anyhow, the Senate is considering the NDAA as well, and would include some of this stuff around this amendment. Aides for Republican and Democratic lawmakers have both reported that the NSA is unsurprisingly opposed to these restrictions and is lobbying lawmakers to have it removed. This is my shocked face. Yeah, I'm not shocked at all. The NSA, according to the article, has acknowledged in the past that they have bought data in the past from data brokers, though no one knows exactly to what extent, because the NSA doesn't exactly go out of their way to put this information out there. Supposedly, there's a large number of guidelines and rules written by lawyers, which I'm sure have loopholes and all kinds of stuff. around the practice, this type of practice, but we don't even know what all those are because a number of them remain classified. So you got this going on here about where this bill is going to tell the intelligence organizations, the military organizations, no, you can't go out and you can't buy data about U.S. citizens. You can't use it as a way to get around the idea of we don't want to bother with getting a search warrant. We'll just go buy it instead from somebody that's got it up, for some data broker that sells it to anybody with a credit card. So in the past, on the judiciary side, the Supreme Court has ruled that the government must obtain warrants when trying to obtain data that does things like one particular ruling that is a quote chronicles a person's past movements through the records of his cell phone signals, end quote. There was a ruling previous to that where the court had said that Americans shouldn't expect privacy in all the cases when they're voluntarily giving all of this data to companies to create stores of information about them, much like our cars and stuff like that, because we get convenience out of it. And then later on in 2018, the court has kind of pushed back on that a bit and said, well, now it's getting so easy to compile it that provides the government with, and this quote, near perfect surveillance, end quote. So they're saying allowing the data to be given to these companies for commercial purposes does not supersede people's anticipation of privacy. That was also a quote from it. Their decision, though, I guess that's privacy from the government and not privacy from businesses selling and data. So it sounds like there's some growing opinion among lawmakers that, we've gone a bit too far in the government, at least, buying data about U.S. citizens to try and get around things like judicial oversight and the requirement to get search warrants and stuff like that. I do have to wonder how frustrated the intelligence organizations must be about this, as they want this kind of data, but they can't. They're not supposed to have it anyhow. But everybody, we all have Facebook and Google and Apple and General Motors and Volvo and et cetera, to have access to what exactly we're doing, because we're always carrying around phones that are giving up this data and tracking everywhere we go and what we do and what we say and what we think about things. And unfortunately, like Doug says, there's not a lot of there's really not a lot of privacy. It's certainly on a national scale. Privacy laws around what U.S. citizens can expect or how this data should be handled or how it shouldn't be mishandled, which it frequently is. We basically get presented with these large terms of services every time we sign up for something that nobody reads because they're super long, and on your phone they're about that big. And unless you work in the legal profession, you're probably going to have a hard time figuring out what they're trying to get at anyhow, because it's written by lawyers for lawyers and not for anybody else. So anybody can surveil us, just not the intelligence agencies or the government. But of course they do that anyhow. It's I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this because I shake my head at information I give up, that we all give up, some of the expectations we have around this. I understand the government's mission to try and to collect information to prevent things like terrorist actions, whether domestic or foreign or whatnot. But I'm also very leery of giving them much data. So it's an interesting situation. I did laugh a little bit about one of the paragraphs in the article. According to a recently declassified report stating that intelligence agencies were purchasing data to avoid judicial overview. Yeah, no kidding. And expressed horror that this sensitive data, in the quote, in the wrong hands could facilitate blackmail. I'm not sure who the wrong hands are, but I guess it's people who don't have credit cards. Since anybody can buy it, I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see whether this amendment makes it through the Senate and the reconciliation process, which is where the bills in the U.S. House and the Senate get merged into the final bill that gets sent to the president. I'm going to be a little bit surprised if it does, to be honest with you. But perhaps, just maybe, the legislators decide that, yeah, we need to have some limitations on this, and we're going to put some restrictions here. So if this is interesting, you go ahead and take a look at this. Kind of a lot going on here. And with that, let's go back over to Dr. Doug for his impression of the dead parrot act by Monty Python's Flying Circus meets the death scene from Romeo and Juliet.
Ooh, it's not dead, it's just pining. Oh, that's a classic.
True apothecary, thy drugs are quick, and thus the parrot is deceased.
Ooh.
Or maybe he's just pining for the fjords.
Pining for the fjords. Not painting his stone cold. Yeah, that's a great sketch. Well, that's a classic one.
It's an awesome skit.
It really is. It's not my all-time favorite. I think my all-time favorite was the Montgolfier brothers in the golden age of ballooning, but...
I don't know that one. I'll have to go check that out.
Michael Palin is playing the King of Scotland, and he's supposed to be the King of France, but he's actually like Scottish. It's really ridiculous. Yeah, that's an old one from the TV show. So yeah, check that one out. Thank you, Jason. Well, and finally, I have his teaser file. I look at the strange things in it. One of the keywords in it was Throbbing Gristle, which was an old band that I used to like. And it popped this article up for me. So, Elon just keeps trying to prove something. I don't know what he's trying to prove, but he's trying to prove something, apparently. So, last week we saw him change the name of Twitter to X. He forbade everyone from saying I'm tweeting, and they're supposed to say I'm Xing, I think now, or something like that. I mean, and he had, and I'm going to quote this article headline, a giant throbbing X erected without a permit on top of Twitter HQ in San Francisco. I'm sure you've probably seen this story because it was like a headline on every paper. But apparently it's as bright as the detonation of a star, according to people they were talking to. Why? No one knows. Like, let's just put a giant strobe light on top of Twitter headquarters. But, it's Elon. What do you expect? I think this was a failed plot line in Silicon Valley. But anyway, Musk had ordered that all the old Twitter branding be, quote, blowtorched off all sites and buildings and everything else. But last night they were taking it down again. So they put it up. And they started flashing it and, blinding everybody. And then now they're taking it down again because the city. I mean, apparently they put it up without inspection, without permits, without anything else. Just like some people went up on the roof and Elon's like, yeah, stick it up there. Turn it on. Make it brighter. No, even brighter. No, even brighter than that. And the people all end up looking like the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, with their eyes melting out of their heads and stuff. And then he's like, that's still not bright enough. But anyway, I'm pretty glad that Elon bought out all my Twitter stock that I had, and that I currently don't live near any of his buildings. Hijinks will ensue. That's the news. Thanks, Jason, and we will see you on Friday.